Hey there everyone, and welcome to another Sunday chat. I'm recording this one slightly earlier and slightly brighter than usual. It is just after 7:15 on the Friday before this video is due to release, and I have decided that I'm going to make a video that is actually somewhat helpful for my revision, which I am greatly enjoying because all A-level students love revising. My headphones really are a mess, aren't they? Anywho, I am going to do, because I've got my Classics World of the Hero exam in 18 days, I'm going to do, and that's at the time of recording, not when this goes up 2 days later. I'm going to do my video on whether the Aeneid is pro or anti the Roman Empire. Now, for those who don't know, there's a bit of context. And also, this is like a completely unashamed revision method, right? Like, I'm glad that people are tuning in if they're tuning in, but this is just as much for me. I mean, these are always for me in some sense, but this one's even more for me than usual. So, yeah, I've got my copy right here. I've only actually got tags in the first half, then I sort of stopped. Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to be explaining a little bit of why I think that the book is generally anti-war. Also, before I get started, I've realised to show it, so I may as well show it properly. Mother Dearest got me this. Oh, this camera's not actually showing what it is, but some people might be able to recognise the very faint outline. This is like a saint's bracelet, pretty cool. Got St. George here amongst others, which is my dead name, so that's cool. That makes it sound like she did it because it's my dead. No, that's not why she did it. She's lovely and supportive, but I still like St. George, even though I don't have that name anymore. Anywho, Aeneid time. So there's, and also I will be doing this off the top of my head because I want to see how much I can do this off the top of my head, frankly. Now, there's a lot of things that make me think that it's fundamentally an anti-empire, anti-war book, or at the very least, empire skeptical. Maybe not absolutely anti-empire, but empire skeptical. Now, yeah, I'll just go through them and I'll explain it bit by bit. And I've got my copy here to help me find the quotations that I need as well. So, starting with Book 4, for those who don't know, the story of Book 4 of the Aeneid is of Aeneas and Dido. Now, at this point, Aeneas has been... so, Aeneas is a refugee from Troy following the Trojan War, and it is in his destiny, as ordained by the fates, rather than the gods, important distinction, that he is to sail to Latium and start a quote-unquote new Troy there, which is to become Rome. The author, Virgil, is writing under the reign of Emperor Augustus post-Civil War. So that's the miniature backstory for you guys. It's also very hot today, so I'm going to be drinking a lot of water. So if I pause, it's probably to get some more. Now, the story in Book 4 of the Aeneid is really quite a tragic one. Spoilers, by the way, this is going to have Aeneid spoilers, the horror. Book 4 is about Juno's attempts, the god, to slow Aeneas from reaching Latium because she's worried that he'll exterminate the Latins, the people that live there, because they're like her favourite people. And Venus's attempts to speed up the process of Aeneas getting to Latium. And both of them are using Carthage, which is where Dido rules, to do this. Now, Aeneas is in Carthage at this point, and Dido is made, because Venus and Juno agree to this, Dido is made to fall in love with Aeneas. and Juno sort of proposes this with the expectation that it will slow Aeneas, and it doesn't. And Jupiter ends up finding out that Aeneas is dawdling, essentially, trying to settle down with Dido, and so sends Mercury to speed him along. And then when he does speed along, Dido decides to kill herself, right? So, by the way, warning, the Aeneid is a miserable book. Warning done. I don't, but yeah, so for me, I've always considered this to be, when I was first reading this, I honestly thought that the Romans weren't that sort of troubled by the death of Dido, because the way that it was originally taught to us is that Dido is supposed to be a stand-in for Cleopatra, who Mark Antony had sided with in the Civil War against Augustus, because she's a sort of foreign Eastern queen, right? That it was like a similar, almost archetype, as it were. Now, my hair looks ridiculous. Now, as time has gone on, and I've begun to develop my opinion on the book as being a sort of war skeptical book, or an empire skeptical book, but mainly a war skeptical book, I'm beginning to see this as a sort of more tragic story. Now, ultimately, even if Dido is made to be somewhat delusional by the gods, it's worth noting that this is one of the few books where it focuses almost entirely on her. It's the only one that's told from her perspective. And it is really quite tragic. So, for example, if I were to find a bit, I may as well read a bit of the book. Why not? So, for context, she's decided to kill herself upon a funeral pyre, following Aeneas' leaving, and basically she deceived her sister to help her build the funeral pyre, and was like, "Oh yeah, it's to bury my love for Aeneas," when in reality she's ending her own life. So she spoke, and while speaking fell upon the sword. Her attendants saw her fall. They saw the blood foaming on the blade and staining her hands, and filled the high walls of the palace with their screaming. Rumour ran raving like a bacchant through the stricken city. The palace rang with lamentation and groaning and the wailing of women, and the heavens gave back the sound of mourning. It was as though the enemy were within the gates, and the whole of Carthage or Tyre were falling with flames raging and rolling over the roofs of men and gods. Anna, the sister, heard and was beside herself. She, by the way, worth noting that this is translated from Latin. She came rushing in terror through the middle of the crowd, tearing her face and beating her breast, calling out her sister's name as she lay dying. So this is what it meant. It was all to deceive your sister. This was the purpose of the pyre and the flames and the altars. You have abandoned me. I do not know how to begin to reproach you. Do you not want your sister's company when you were dying? You could have called me to share your fate, and we would both have died in the same moment of the same grief. To think it was my hands that built the pyre, and my voice that called upon the gods of our fathers, so that you could be so cruel as to lay yourself down here to die without me. It is not only yourself you have destroyed, but also your sister and your people, their leaders who came with you from Sidon, and the city you have built. Give me water, I shall wash her wounds and catch any last lingering breath with my lips. Saying these words, she climbed to the top of the pyre and was now holding her dying sister to her breast and cherishing her, sobbing as she dried the dark blood with her own dress. Once more Dido tried to raise her heavy eyes, but failed. The wound hissed round the sword beneath her breast. 3 times she raised herself on her elbow. 3 times she fell back on the bed. With wavering eyes she looked for light in the heights of heaven and groaned when she found it. All-powerful Juno then took pity on her long anguish and difficult death, and sent Iris down from Olympus to free her struggling spirit and loosen the fastenings of her limbs. For since she was dying not by the decree of fate, or by her own deserts, but pitiably and before her time, in a sudden blaze of madness, Proserpina had not yet taken a lock of her golden hair or consigned her to the Stygian Orcus. Sorry if I butcher any names, by the way. So Iris, bathed in dew, flew down on her saffron wings, trailing all her colours across the sky opposite the sun, and hovering over Dido's head to say, I am commanded to take this lock of hair as a solemn offering to Dis, and now I free you from your body. With these words, she raised her hand and cut the hair, and as she cut, all warmth went out of Dido's body, and her life passed into the winds. Now that seems like a pretty... I don't know. I feel like it's very hard as a modern reader to hear that and not think that there's some attempt at gaining sympathy. And don't get me wrong, she'd done some pretty crazy things prior in the book. And the book is no stranger to making us feel bad for people who are supposed to be enemies, but, you know, as I'll explain later, that's more of why I think that this is potentially a book we should be skeptical of. But two things that stuck out to me while reading that, and I haven't actually read it out loud in a while. The idea of it being as though the enemy were within is sort of, to me, quite evocative of the Trojan War, quite evocative of the suffering that Aeneas talks about in, I want to say book 2 is when he actually talks about it, but it happens prior to the actual, because a lot of the, some of the Aeneid is a flashback, so it's basically in the flashback bit where he's telling Dido, actually, of the sufferings that he took to get there. Kind of like when Odysseus is talking to the Phaeacians. So, yeah, that stuck out to me, or stood out to me rather. And then also I think you could counter it, and this is possibly how I would counter it, with the idea that actually she's not fated to have died, because the prophecy and fate is supposed to be the fate of Rome. So you could use that to sort of throw the blame then onto her. But I ultimately feel like that's... Maybe I'm being too charitable, and maybe a contemporary reader would have been far more negative, and frankly been not as concerned with the wills of women. But it's really bugging me, that strand of hair. But I can't help but feel like that's supposed to be as sort of biting as it is. Now, there are other things, right? I think the next one that I would go to, if I were to, again, this is totally not revision, guys, but if I were to like get an essay that was something along the lines of the Aeneid is an anti-empire, the Aeneid promotes empire, discuss, right? This is probably what I'd do. This is probably what I'd talk about. I'd probably talk about book 6. Book 6 is when Aeneas visits his father Anchises in the underworld. And the purpose of this is to say goodbye to his father. I don't know his father properly, which is quite strange. But in the Odyssey as well, the reasoning for going to the underworld is quite strange. It just seems to be this weird side quest that all heroes have to do, right? But when he's there, Anchises tells him about sort of the settlement that will be built as a result of his migration and conquering of Latium. And there is what's called the Parade of Heroes. And I think I'm going to read... Will I read this? See, is weird, because some parts of this seem very sort of pro-empire, right? And I'm just going to try and find probably the best bit, or one of the bits that's the most sort of promoting. I guess I could just... Yeah, I'll read this chapter. I'll read this bit. So, for context, anyone who's got a copy of the Aeneid, we are on roughly line 756. This is Anchises, Aeneas' father, speaking to him. Come now, and I shall tell you of the glory that lies in store for the sons of Dardanus, for the men of Italian stock who will be our descendants, bright spirits that will inherit our name, and I shall reveal to you your own destiny. That young warrior you see there leaning on the sword of valour, to him is allotted the place nearest to the light in this grove, and he will be the first of us to rise into the ethereal air with a mixture of Italic blood. He will be called Silvius, an Alban name, and he will be your son, born after your death. He will live long, but he will be born too late for you to know, and your wife Lavinia will rear him in the woods to be a king and father of kings, and found our dynasty to rule in Alba Longa. Next to him is Procas, glory of the Trojan race, and Capys, and Numitor, and the king who will renew your name, Silvius Aeneas, your equal in piety and in arms if ever he succeeds to the rightful throne in Alba. And it goes on for a while, right? And then it talks about Romulus and Remus, who are the sort of other mythological founders of Rome. And Romulus, son of Mars, will march at his grandfather's side. He will be of the stock of Assaracus, and his mother, who will rear him, will be Ilia. Do you see how the double crest stands on his head, and the father of the gods himself already honours him with his own emblem? Look at him, my son. Under his auspices will be founded Rome in all her glory, whose empire shall cover the earth, and whose spirit shall rise to the heights of Olympus. That's all well and good, and it continues for a while, but then you get bits of the parade of heroes that are genuinely quite tragic, such as the death of Marcellus, and I'll spare you the reading for that. But Marcellus is the adopted son of Augustus, who ends up dying before he can be the rightful heir. And that's sort of quite a tragic bit. But then the bit that's kind of interesting, the last two little paragraphs, for context, I am reading the David West translation. There are two gates of sleep. One is the gate of Horn, and it is an easy exit for true shades. The other is made all in gleaming white ivory, but through it the powers of the underworld send false dreams up towards the heavens. There on that night did Anchises walk with his son and with the Sibyl, and spoke such words to them as he went on their journey through the gate of ivory. Aeneas made... Oh, I don't need to read that last bit, but I will. Aeneas made him... No, I won't, because I can't speak. So again, we see something that seems to be challenging whether the empire is a legitimate... whether the sort of prophecy of empire as set down by Anchises at the very least is legitimate. You know, he ends up going through the gate of ivory out of the underworld, which seems to suggest that everything that comes with him, including potentially his memories of the event, is a false dream, right? So that's just really strange. And then we're sort of... I don't want to make this too long, so I'm just going to take us to Book 9. Context: Book 9 is another separate side story, and it's that of Nisus and Euryalus. Now they are potentially friends, potentially lovers. I prefer the latter, which can be considered problematic because there's a questionable age gap. But we are talking about ancient Rome, and I mean, if you look at the Socratic circle, I know that's Greece, but bear with me here. You get a similar approach to let's just say you get a similar approach to age as you get with the ancient Greeks and the Socratic circle, that being a, by modern standards, concerning lack of care. Nevertheless, Nisus and Euryalus are very, very close, right? Euryalus being significantly younger, and they are Aeneas' soldiers, and they've decided to split off from the group to basically just because now the Trojans are at war with the Latins, right? To basically just kill a bunch of Latins. Okay, they are caught in doing while they're sleeping because it's like a siege situation. Okay, so the Latins are sieging the Trojans and the Arcadians, but that's not important, right? The Latins and the Trojans. Actually, the Arcadian thing is important. I can mention that at some point. But the Latins are sieging the Trojans, and Nisus and Euryalus, who are Trojan Aeneas' men, sneak into the Latin camp, and they want to try and start killing them. But both are caught and both are killed, fundamentally. And I want to see how much I'd have to read if I were to... Yeah, I'll read 2 pages or so. Consider getting into audiobooks for a short while, it'd be fun, like making them. But I don't know if I've really got the voice for it, and also, by virtue of being trans, I don't like my voice. So... yeah. If you don't want to listen to 3 pages or so, tough luck. Wait, what is this in? So I just don't want to... yeah. At this moment, while the rest of the Latin army was waiting in battle order on the plain, a detachment of cavalry had been sent out from their city and was now on its way with dispatches to Turnus, 300 of them, all carrying shields under the command of Vulcans. They were approaching the camp and coming up to its ramparts when they saw Nisus and Euryalus in the distance, veering off along the road to the left. Euryalus had forgotten about the helmet. They'd stolen the helmet from the Latins. Which is, funnily enough, this is why people would defend it as not being an anti-Rome thing, because an alternate interpretation is that they're basically being punished for their selfishness, because in part they do go on their own, they go AWOL to get loot, right, and glory. Reflecting the rays of the moon and its dim shadows on the night, the enemy saw and did not fail to act. "Halt there, you men!" shouted Vulcans from the head of his column. "Why are you on the road? Who are you? Why are you armed? Where are you going?" They offered no reply, but ran off into the trees, putting their trust in the darkness of the night. The horsemen spread... I'm really reading more than I thought I would. The horsemen spread out along each side of the wood they knew so well, blocking the tracks that led in, and putting guards on every approach. It was a rough horse full of dense undergrowth and dark ilex trees, all of it choked with thick brambles, and the path glimmered only here and there among the faint tracks left by animals. Euryalus was held back by the darkness under the trees and by the weight of his booty. That does mean loot, that does not mean the other thing. And in his fright he lost his way. But Nisus escaped. Without knowing it, he had come through the enemy, and the area later known as Alban, taking its name from the city of Alba, but in those days King Latinus had high fenced enclosures there for his cattle. I'm going to drink. Back. Water I meant, by the way. High for his cattle. He now stopped and looked back for his friend, but could not see him. "Poor Euryalus," he cried, "where have I left you? Where can I go for you? Where can I look for you, rather?" Here's a fun thing. Aeneas does the exact same thing, losing his wife in, I think, book 2. So, you know, for those who think there is subtext. And even as he spoke, he was beginning to go back over his path through the wood, with all its deceptive twists and turns, retracing every remembered step as he wandered through the silent undergrowth. He heard horses. He heard the noise of the pursuers and their signals, and in no time shouts reached his ears, and he saw Euryalus. Lost in the treacherous darkness of the wood, and confused by the sudden tumult, he had been caught by the whole enemy troop and was now being carried off, still struggling desperately against all the odds. Again, remember that Euryalus is quite young. What was nicest to do? How could he Virgil points it out. How could he rescue his young friend? How should he attack? What weapons could he use? Should he throw himself into the thick of their swords and rush through wound upon wounds to a glorious death? In that instant, he drew back his arm, and brandishing his throwing spear, he looked up to the moon in heaven and prayed in these words: O goddess, daughter of Latona, O glory of the stars and guardian of the groves, be with me now and help me in my hour of trouble. If ever my father, Hyrtacus? I'm going to butcher so many of these names, by the way, I apologise. Hyrtacus has offered gifts for me at your altars. If ever I myself have enriched them with the spoils of my hunting, hanging my offerings in the dome of your temple, or nailing them on your holy gables, guide my weapons through the air and grant that I may throw this troop of my enemies into confusion. When he had spoken, he hurled the spear with the whole force of his body. Parting the shadows of the night, it flew towards Sulmo, whose back was turned, and there it struck and broke, sending a splinter through his diaphragm. He rolled over, vomiting a stream of warm blood from his chest in the chill of death, and heaving his flanks in deep-drawn agonies. Worth noting, by the way, more so than the Odyssey, although the Odyssey does it as well, the Aeneid is very keen on describing deaths in brutal detail, which, I mean, the author Virgil had seen civil war, so you can't really blame him, but still. Again, potentially like anti-empire, anti-war-esque. While the enemy were looking around in all directions, there was Nisus, emboldened by his success, with another shaft ready by his ear, poised to aim. They were still in tumult when the spear came whistling and caught Tagus in the middle of his forehead, went through the brain, and stuck there, growing warm. Vulcan's was wild with rage, but nowhere could he see the thrower, and he could not decide where to direct the fury of his assault. Never mind, he shouted. For the moment, you and your warm blood will pay me for both of them. He drew his sword and rushed at Euryalus. This was too much for Nisus. Out of his mind with terror and unable to endure his anguish, he broke cover, shouting at the top of his voice, Here I am! Here I am! I am the one who did it! Aim your weapons at me, you Rutulians!" He's fighting the Rutulians here, my bad. Still, the Rutulians have sided with the Latins. "The whole scheme was mine. He was innocent. He could not have done it. I swear by this sky above me, and the stars who know the truth, his only offence is to have loved the wrong friend too much." Again, gay. Not just saying that because I want to say that, like the Romans were really unconcerned with sexual orientation compared to how we are now. So it wouldn't be like a weird thing. It wouldn't be like an out there thing. It's just not explicitly stated. He was still speaking as the sword was driven through the ribs of Euryalus, full force, shattering his white breast. He rolled on the ground in death. The blood flowered over his beautiful body. His neck grew limp, and the head drooped on his shoulders, like a scarlet flower languishing and dying when its stem has been cut by the plough, or like poppies bowing their heads when the rain burdens them and their necks grow weary. But Nisus rushed into the thick of the enemy, looking only for Vulcan's. Vulcan's was the only thought in his mind. The Rutulians gathered round their leader, and in close fighting threw Nisus back again and again as he came at them from one side after another. But he bore on nonetheless, whirling a sword like lightning till he met the Rutulian face to face and buried it in his mouth as he opened it to shout. So, in the moment of his own dying, he cut off the head of his enemy. Then, pierced through and through, he hurled himself on the dead body of his friend and rested there at last in the peace of death. Fortune has favoured you both. If there is any power in my poetry, this is Virgil speaking as narrator. The day will never come when time will erase you from the memory of man, which I am contributing to, yippee! While the house of Aeneas remains by the immovable rock of the capital, and the father of the Romans still keeps his empire. The victorious Rutulians had collected their booty and their spoils, and carried the body of Vulcan to their camp, weeping as they went. Again, there's an emphasis on the sorrow that the enemy endures, which it's, you know, it doesn't seem too promotional. The enemy's weirdly humanized throughout this entire thing. There we are. There was no less sorrow waiting for them there when they found Rhamnes. It's Rhamnes. There's so many names in this book. Dead, and with him Serenus and Numa and all their other leaders who had been killed in that one night of slaughter, which Euryalus and Nisus had done. A great crowd gathered round the dead and dying heroes of the ground still running with rivers of newly shed blood, still warm and foaming. Between them they recognized the spoils, the shining helmet of Messapus, and the medallions, which had cost so much sweat to recover. By now Aurora was just leaving the saffron bed of Tithonus, is probably how I'd say it, and sprinkling her new light upon the world. The sun was soon streaming over the earth, and soon all things stood revealed in its light. Turnus, in full armour himself, was rousing his men to arms, and each of the leaders was taking his own troop into battle in ranks of bronze, whipping up their anger with different accounts of the night's work. They had even struck the heads of Nisus and Euryalus on spears. What a sight that was! And paraded along behind them, shouting. Aeneas's men. That was awful. Why did I do that? I should have paused. Sorry. Aeneas's men, long enduring, drew up in battle order to face them on the walls on their left flank. Also. Aeneas's men, long enduring, drew up in battle order to face them on the walls of their left flank. The right was guarded by the river, and they manned their great ditches and stood on their high towers, stricken with grief and shocked by the sight of the heads of the comrades they knew so well, impaled on spears and dripping black gore. Meanwhile, rumour flew with the news on her swift wings through the whole terrified city of the Trojans, and came gliding into the ears of the mother of Euryalus. In that instant, the warmth left her very bones. The shuttle was dashed from her fingers, and its thread unwound. Crazed with grief, she rushed out, and wailing as women do, and tearing her hair, she made for the front ranks of the army on the walls. With no thought for the presence of men, with no thought for the danger of flying weapons, she stood there on the ramparts, and filled heaven with her cries of mourning. Is this you I am looking at, Euryalus? How could you leave me alone so cruelly, you who were the last comfort of my old age? Could not your poor mother have been allowed a few last words with you before you went on that dangerous expedition? So now you lie in a strange land, and your body is food for the dogs and the birds of Latium. I am your mother, and did not walk before you at your funeral, nor close your eyes, nor wash your wounds. Oh my gosh, my dog. Nor cover you with the robe Sorry about that. I am your mother, and did not walk before you at your funeral, nor close your eyes, nor wash your wounds, nor cover you with the robe I have been weaving for you day and night with the speed I could, finding in my loom some solace for the cares of age. Where am I to look for you, my son? What piece of earth holds your mutilated body and dismembered limbs? Is this head all you bring back to me? Is that what I have followed over land and sea? Strike me, you Rutulians, if you have any human feelings. Throw all your spears at me. Let me be the first to die. Or will you take pity on me, great father of the gods, and blast my detested body into Tartarus with your lightning, since I can find no other way to end this bitter life? Sorrow like this was too much for the Trojans to bear. The sound of mourning was heard all through the army. Their strength was broken. They were losing their appetite for battle, and her presence was fanning the flames of their grief. At a word from Ilunius, and the bitter weeping Iülus, Aeneas and Actor came and took her between them back into the house. Now, again, the first bit of why I think that's anti-war is because it's fucking miserable. Like, I'm sorry, but like it is, and I know that you guys might not care, but I do. Okay, I think about this a lot. Fun fact, the video is, at the time of speaking, long enough that, not including planning time, I would have just finished my essay when I write about the Aeneid in the actual exam for the 40 marker. Because I've got 40 minutes total, 5 of which is planning time, and we've just gone past 35 minutes, so jinkies. Obviously I wouldn't write out full sections of the book like that in my essay. Pardon me. Yeah, and the other thing as well, the idea of Euryalus' mother still being there really goes to show how tragic this loss in particular is. Because, like, all the women had been left behind in Book 9, which is 4 books ago, on an entirely different island, under, I think his name's Alcestis or something like this. Because, like, the gods has, like, made them mad and gotten them to set, like, a ship on fire, and so they just left them behind, because they didn't want to keep travelling any longer, basically. And so the idea that Euryalus' mother, and I'm not refusing to use her name for any reason other than we don't get a name for her. But the fact that she's still there, to me, really goes to show that he is young. He is in need of care. He is in need of support in some way or another. And it just highlights that it really highlights how much suffering comes with war. So yeah, I don't know. I think about I said this before, but they're sort of my Roman Empire. So yeah, that's just 3 examples of many of war in the Aeneid sucking, or some sort of pursuit of empire leading to people being miserable, well, actually the middle one wasn't. Point is, these things combined, these really quite harrowing reminders of the suffering that the imperial pursuit causes, and even its uncertainty. I mean, for those who study the Aeneid as well, they may remember there's the golden bow situation, which I actually haven't remembered in ages. So the imperial destiny at times looks uncertain, and it also looks bloody and upsetting, and one questions whether one wants to be a part of it at all. I mean, the women weren't. They left behind in Book 5. Maybe they made the right decision, right? So yeah. In short, for those who care, of which I'm sure there are none, that's some of the reasons why I think the Aeneid is very much an anti-war, anti-empire book. Right. Don't really know what else to say, other than I might not do these during exam season. I might, because it's actually like revision, but I might not. We shall see. Again, my first exam is at the time of recording 18 days away, so I don't know if anyone watches these fully. I know I get like 3 views per thing, but as I've said before, I don't care. so I'm just literally finding my channel now so I can upload this straight after I hit end record, because Lord knows I put no effort into these and just do them on the fly, and that's that. But oh, I got 4 last time, look at me go. But that's because I talked about myself like a loser. This time I actually talked about something interesting-ish. But yeah, thank you all, and I suppose, because I can't think of anything else to say, I will end this in as much time as I should be spending on a 30 marker, that being 40 minutes. God bless, hope you have a wonderful Sunday, and See you soon.